Welcome to the Empower Hour, guys. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino, and I'm here with Rachel Maiers. She's the ASM at Lululemon, and she also is certified in yoga. She does some really awesome stuff. She'll just whip it out, and I'm like, how did you just do that? Because I'm really not flexible these days at all.
In-store poses.
Yeah, It's pretty sick.
Yeah.
So tell us about yourself. Who are you? Give us your background.
Okay. It's a pretty big one, I guess. I was born and raised in Maryland, in the state of Maryland on the East Coast. And I went to the University of Maryland and studied chemical engineering.
What?
Yeah, and then did not want to be a chemical engineer, so I decided to go to law school.
Why didn't you want to be a chemical engineer?
I went into it because I loved chemistry and I loved to know sort of the composition of things and how things grow and how things work. But then being a chemical engineer is more about designing processes, about how to create like tires, which is sort of, to me, was a bit boring.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't want to do that. And I also felt like with engineering, it was so science-based. And I love, to read, and I loved literature, and I just wasn't really ready, I guess, at the age of 21 to say this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I decided to go to law school and studied law. Yeah, studied law for 3 years, and it was amazing. It was what I was craving at that time, which was to not do science, but to read and to study and to analyze literature in a different form, which is really what law is. So that was a really great experience, and then I was a lawyer for 10 years. Started out in Philadelphia, where I went to law school. I went to Villanova, so I was...
Oh, I didn't know you went to Villanova.
Yeah, I went to Villanova.
Villanova's a great school.
Yeah, it was an excellent school. I was very, very lucky to have studied there. It's a beautiful school, like just aesthetically looking at it. It has a lot of amazing people from all over, the United States. It's in such a cool town with great people. Philadelphia is a great city, so it was all around a really positive experience. So it was good. And then I worked, my specialty was corporate litigation with an environmental background.
So what is
because I had done that. So with my engineering, I didn't want to just say, hey, I studied engineering for 5 years and now it's totally wasted because I've decided to do law.
Right, because it's a lot of time and energy that you put in something.
For sure, and it's a lot of knowledge, and so you feel like I've learned all of this stuff.
And I want to use it.
Yeah, I should do something with it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do a type of law where I could use my engineering knowledge, and so I decided to do environmental litigation. So the projects that I worked on were where there had been like soil and groundwater contamination from like factories or businesses that were, leaching things into the water or the soil without realizing it. They produce, like, let's say paint, and they have water that's going out into the river, and they think the water is just, dirty water, but it's actually contaminated water that then contaminates the lake and the soil and so forth. And so I got to use my engineering background because when these lawsuits would come up, I would have the capacity to both analyze it from a legal standpoint, but also to read the engineering reports about the chemical contamination in the water and the soil and understand what they were talking about, which was a great advantage to small firms that couldn't hire engineers to speak to the lawyers. They just wanted one person who could do both.
That's perfect.
Yeah, so it was great.
So you had like your own little niche, kind of.
I did, yeah. And so that's what I did. I did environmental litigation for a number of years. And then...
was there anything specific that you worked on that you like absolutely loved? Like one, I mean, you probably can't talk about certain cases, but...
I wouldn't say there was anything, like one case in particular. I think it was just the experience as a whole of feeling like you are part of the solution and not the problem. Because for us, it's not like, somebody gets into a car accident and it causes damage and how much do you owe them? This was about the fact that there was like pollution and contamination and these companies needed to fix it, like it needed to be fixed.
For the environment and for the population.
Exactly right. And so it was more about not just like suing these companies for money because money does no good. It was about working with the companies to say, okay, what chemicals were you using, so that we know what we have to do to set up what's called bioremediation, and it's basically like what organic compounds you can put into the soil and into the water to sort of like naturally clean up some of the stuff that was done.
Oh, well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So
what kind of products what do you use for that?
They're microorganisms, and that's the thing, is like, it's sort of like when you take antibiotics to, you know, cure whatever's going on inside of you. There are natural organisms that get into the soil, and because of the way they either breed or the way they feed, they produce chemicals that combat bad chemicals. Essentially is kind of how it works in a
That's really neat.
Really easy way to explain it. Yeah. And so you can put certain chemicals into groundwater and into soil, and or not chemicals, sorry, organisms, that when they're doing whatever it is that they do in the process of living, that they create, whether it's high oxygen content, and high oxygen fights, you know, certain contamination, or whether it's they produce high carbon, and that, you know, it's just
given the situation, what you needed.
So it was, yeah, and that, to me, that's what I enjoyed about it on a whole, was being part of the solution and not the problem. But the thing about that is those cases go on for years and years and years and years, and so I found myself working on the same things consistently, and so after a few years, it was sort of like a bit boring, I guess, for me.
You got tired of doing the same thing.
So I wanted to do something different. So then I moved into sort of doing contract legal work, where I moved to New York for a couple of years and worked in New York, where I contracted myself out to big firms who needed help on specific cases. So they might have, like, you know, 50 lawyers that they employ year round, but certain really big cases come up where they need help. Yeah, and so I was a contract lawyer, so I got to work on a lot of different cases for very short periods of time. Basically doing document review and collecting information for court cases that were coming up. And so that was interesting for me, having done the same thing for a number of years, just sort of getting little insights into these big cases that were happening and working on them, and then being able to move on and do something different. So that was, and I got to live in New York City.
Did you like New York?
I loved it. It was amazing.
What did you like about it? Because I know when I was in New York, it was too cold.
Yeah, the winters are very cold.
They're freezing.
Yeah, that's very true. It's funny because before I moved to New York, I was speaking to a friend from New York, and she always said that everyone should live in New York City and no one should stay. And I thought that that was such a very insightful thing.
It's super insightful.
Yeah,
because you learn a lot in the time that you're there, and just you kind of develop and grow as a person, because it's very raw. But I could never live there.
Yeah, and I love that 24 hours a day, whatever you want to do is possible.
It is.
There's food all the time, there's art all the time, there's music all the time, there's shopping all the time, there's people, there is life all the time. And I love that, but after a while, it's a lot.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, it is exhausting. And I definitely, after, you know, sort of the near 2 years that I spent there, I sort of felt tired and was ready to do something different. Yeah. So then I moved to Los Angeles.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I moved there because I was living with my younger sister in New York, and she decided she wanted to be an actress.
Oh, wow. Just off the whim.
Yeah, she was like, I just think I want to be an actress, and I was like, okay. So she's very different from me.
Rachel's very good at supporting whatever you want, and we'll talk about that later. She does a great job, especially at the store at Lululemon, with supporting all of us and helping us develop our dreams and our goals, and she does it in like a non-judgmental or pushy way. It's just kind of like, okay, you want to do that? Okay, let's go. Tie your shoelaces up, we're going.
Yeah, and I've always tried to be that person for my sister, and it's been fun for me because I am such the planner, and let's think about this, and, you know, and she was always the dreamer who was like, I'm just going to move to Los Angeles and, you know, try to be an actress. And so I sort of would ride on her cape, you know. She would take me to all these places, and I would support her in her dreams, and I sort of got to have a little bit of fun with it. So that was cool. So we moved to Los Angeles, and I had actually worked in New York with someone who was based out of San Diego, and they had a sister law firm in Los Angeles. And so he said, if you get to LA and you find that you need a job, contact me, which I did. And so he got me a job at a small boutique firm in Beverly Hills.
Ooh.
Which was cool. I was only in LA for a year, but it was an all-around positive experience. I worked for a small firm, which was nice. It was right in Beverly Hills. The work was easy, and it was kind of cool to have the zip code of 90210
Yeah.
and just be like I'm living in Beverly Hills. So that was fun. And I got married while I was living in LA, which is how I ended up in Sydney, Australia.
I did not know that.
Mm.
Rachel's married to Chris. Chris does bodybuilding. That's why I get along with Chris pretty well. We talk about random things.
Yeah.
He's fun. He's a character.
He's great, yeah. So I did quite a bit of traveling when I was living in New York, and I had traveled to Europe probably about 4 or 5 times.
Oh, wow.
My sister and I used to go, and whenever I had time off, and we would travel, because it was such an easy flight. Like from New York to Europe is like, 5-6 hours. And back then, not now, it was quite cheap. The flights were quite cheap. So we would travel regularly, and I met Chris when I was in London, one time, which was very cool. And long story short, we ended up getting married during the time that I was in LA. So he came to visit me, and we decided it was time to take the plunge after having sort of been dating, if that's what you want to call it, for 3 years. So we drove to Vegas and got married.
Oh, your
Yeah.
rebel side comes out.
Oh, yeah. I was like, hey, if I can move to LA with my wannabe actress sister, then I can just drive to Vegas and get married. Best decision of my life. I mean, it changed the course of my life, but it took me on a great adventure. So, so I finished out my year there in California and then moved to Sydney, Australia with Chris.
What a move.
Yeah, it was massive. And I was so excited, and I had so many friends who had been to Australia and said, it's beautiful, you're gonna love it. And I was so pumped and had no idea that I was gonna be walking into one of the hardest periods of my life. It was just being in a country that wasn't home. They speak English, but they speak a different kind of English. And, having to start at the bottom in terms of being a lawyer. I was only qualified to be a paralegal when I first got there.
So what does that mean? What is the difference?
So paralegal is sort of, to be honest, the paralegals are sort of like the unglorified, unlicensed lawyers. As
Okay.
a lot of paralegals actually know more about the cases than the lawyers, because they do a lot of the research and a lot of the paperwork and a lot of the background work. As a paralegal, you can't go to court, you can't, sort of be the person who does the final sign off, but you can do all of the legwork.
So you kind of lose the fun of the whole thing, though.
Yeah, because you don't get to see it through.
No.
Yeah, and that was really hard. It was a great learning experience for me, especially being in a foreign country in a new legal environment. I definitely learned a lot being a paralegal.
Is the law a lot different there?
It's a lot different. Their property, constitution, everything is so different from here. I mean, basic stuff is, you shouldn't shoot anybody. I mean,
Right.
that sort of stuff is the same, but the type of stuff that I did, the more corporate litigation type stuff, I mean, companies are set up different there.
Do you think
the environmental stuff is different
Do you think
there.
things are run better? I mean, because we're always comparing like our economies and the way we run businesses and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you think things are run better in Australia and European countries than they are in the U.S.?
The legal system has some positives, I think, over there. In the United States, if you, let's say, sue someone and you have to pay your whole way. So what stops a lot of people from actually moving forward is the fact that they don't have the money to do it. So
Right.
you may know that you're right and you have a good claim, but your claim is against somebody who has a lot more money than you do, and so to litigate is going to be difficult. Whereas in Australia, if you are the winning party, you can get all of your costs back. So that's
Wow.
a positive thing. And I think, I mean, I haven't practiced as a lawyer in the United States for a while now, but I think that they are making moves to make that more available to people who are litigating here, to be able to get their costs as part of the reward, so that it's not going to stop people from litigating. But that's why you see a lot of U.S. attorneys doing like pro bono stuff, where they'll say, we know you have a good case and we're going to take you on, and you don't have to pay the fees unless we win, and you get money, and then you can pay the fees from that. So yeah, I think that part of it is very positive. I think that there's less litigation in Australia. There's not so much that slip and fall, go out and sue somebody type thing. People work things out more on a personal level in terms of, we don't want to litigate, let's just settle and make things right. So I think that that's a positive thing. The system is set up different in terms of, here we just have solicitors, lawyers, you know, whatever you want to call them, and the system in Australia is set up so that you have what are called sort of your legal counsel, and then you have your barristers. And so the barristers are the ones who do all court stuff. Like, that's all they do. They're the ones who appear before the judge and do the court stuff, and that's all they do. And so the legal counsel who actually represent the clients, ultimately when they get to the point of needing to go to court, have to then, you know, engage a barrister to work for them and be the court person.
Wow, so there's a lot of different dimensions.
Yeah, a lot of different dimensions. And, but it means that you can have, the legal counsel can have a really great relationship with their client and advising them, and ultimately the pressure of winning the case and being before the judge and making the really hard legal decisions are in somebody else's hands. So it sort of allows you, I think, as a middleman to have a better relationship with your client. And then if the barrister comes to you and says, we can't do this because that and that, you can then say to the client, it's actually not me.
It's not me at all.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a short commercial break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to learn more about Rachel. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino. This is the Empower Hour, and we'll be back in a few seconds.
We're here with Hunter Haviland because he is a member of our panel on February 26th. We're going to talk about Hawaii, the state of unfunded liabilities. Hi, Hunter.
Hi, Jay.
So what does it look like from your point of view, being on that panel?
Well, part of my work is with the Asia Pacific Center for Regenerative Design. And so with that, we're kind of taking a broader notion of, when we talk about liabilities, what are some of the external factors, right? So if we're talking about sustainability across the globe, resilience to natural disasters, our use of natural resources, and how those things do or don't get incorporated into our current understandings of the state of the state.
Yeah, and thus the liabilities and thus the economy. Yeah. So that's February 26th. It's a Thursday. It's at Laniakea. It starts at 12 noon. Come down 11:30 for lunch. Check out our website to sign up, thinktechhawaii.com. Hunter is one of 7 speakers. We'll be trying to talk to some of the others too, let you know what they're going to do. And sign up. We'll see you there. It'll be important. It's one of the most important things we can think of. Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to the Empower Hour, guys. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino. I'm here with Rachel. She's the ASM at Lululemon. She was a lawyer in her past life. That's what she calls it. And we're going to get into that more right now, probably. She was just talking about barristers in Australia. I'm learning a lot about law right now.
Yeah.
I had no clue. I like that. I like that you can maintain your relationship. You have one person that maintains a relationship with the client, and then you have the barrister who goes out and fights the dirty stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it was funny for me as well, because I didn't realize that they have the old sort of Commonwealth style in Australia. And so the first time I walked into a court,
I don't know what that is.
Well, when I walked into the court, everyone's in like the black robes with like the fake white hair wigs.
What did you do? Laughed.
Yeah. I was like, huh? And they're like, I was like, what? I was like, oh. Because Australia is still, and that's one of the reasons why I suppose their government structure and legal system is different. They are a Commonwealth of the United Kingdom. So the Queen is actually the head of their government. They're not sort of an independent republic. They're still part of,
I didn't know that either.
Of the United Kingdom. And so their whole legal system is set up in the same way that it's set up in London, which is the very old, in the UK, which is the very old school, traditional, court structure with the wigs.
So what would you guys wear?
Women wear wigs as well, and capes. I don't, because I wasn't a barrister. Only the barristers wear them.
Oh my.
I just got to wear my suit, but yeah, it was pretty interesting the first time I walked in and saw, and they do the whole like pounding of the gavel in, and they stand up and the judge walks in, and yeah, it's
of course it's normal for them, so they don't think about it, and so and then you walk in, you're like, I was not prepared for this at all today.
And you have to, and I didn't know you had to bow every time you enter and exit the courtroom when the judge is actually in the courtroom. And so the first time that somebody said, oh, can you go out to our conference room and grab this piece of paper, I left and I came back in, and they're just like, you didn't bow. And I was like, I don't even understand what you're saying to me right now. So yeah, when the court's in session and the judge is sitting on the throne, You have to bow as you exit and enter as a sign of respect.
Are there multiple judges too?
There can be. I sat in court sessions both with 1, 3, and 5 judges on a panel, so it just depends where along the way you are. When you get to sort of appeals and Supreme Court stuff, there tends to be more than one because the decisions are, I suppose, more important with greater impact and outcome. So it was really interesting, very interesting.
And then from there?
So I was a paralegal, eventually got licensed, and worked as in-house legal counsel for a bank for 4 years, five years in Australia. Yeah. So that was that, and it was actually surprisingly probably one of the most successful times for me in my legal career. Because I had to work so hard and I had to start from the bottom, I was so invested and so passionate about it, and I was doing something new and different, and being married to an Australian and having moved to Australia, I thought that the rest of my life was going to be there and that I was a lawyer and that's what I was going to do, and so I worked really hard at my job and had a lot of great wins and successes, and it became a very, I guess, important an integral part of my litigation team at the bank. But I also lost a bit of who I was during that process.
And what do you mean by that?
I suppose I had always really, without putting words around it, had always had work-life balance. I always had time for friends and family outside of my job. I always made sure whatever it was I was doing, I seemed to switch. You know, I was an avid dancer, and then I became a gym junkie.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, I used to teach dance way back in the day, yeah. I always had that sort of balance of all the pieces in my life. And moving to Australia and not having family there except for Chris, and not having any friends there.
Or support network,
and really just having my job, which I was completely investing myself in, I lost all of the other pieces. And litigation is it's a very adversarial form of law, and there's a lot of fighting. And you know, I used to go home to Chris and say, I know every time my phone rings, it's because there's a problem. Like, I'm not the lawyer that you call when deals are being made. Like, I don't draft contracts between people who are building partnerships. Like, I was doing litigation. So people only called me when there was a problem.
And that's stressful.
And it is stressful, yeah. And I always felt stressed, and I felt like my job never stopped. And, you know, I had a BlackBerry that I was attached to, and I was constantly checking my emails and constantly on call and always working. And
this is really weird for me to hear. This is like nothing like Rachel is today. She's like, free spirit.
Yeah.
I ride my bike to yoga. I drink green juice. Oh, it's a glorious day.
Yeah.
She is so, like, you're so zen.
But it was actually a really good sort of, it really allowed me to figure out what mattered to me, because I thought, I went to law school, I'm gonna be a lawyer, I'm totally gonna be this career-driven person, I'm, you know, married, I have these goals around what that looks like. And it was like the more and more I worked towards what it was I thought I wanted and thought was going to be my life, the less and less comfortable I became in my life. And
was it just that you didn't like it, or was there a day that you woke up and you were just like, wow, this isn't happening for me anymore? Or,
you know,
because I think everybody has experienced that at some point, or people are experiencing it right now. And they just, how do you get out of that, or how do you make that switch and go, wow, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, how do I change?
I think for me, like, it was this thing of, it's almost like you get up and you put on your work clothes and you feel like you put on your person of who you are, you know, you put on that mask and you go and you do what you need to do. And sometimes that can be really uncomfortable and we just need to take a break from it. But I think what I realized was that outfit I was wearing, that mask that I was wearing, it was starting to seep in and actually really take over who I was. And there was actually one day where I looked in the mirror and just burst into tears because I didn't know who I was looking at. That person who was angry and who was stressed out and who had stopped doing yoga and was only taking spin because I always felt angry and I just wanted to pedal as fast as I possibly could. And I hated it. And I was associating with other people who were just like me, who were angry.
Because like attracts like.
Exactly right. And I didn't like that. And it is hard because, like you say, a lot of people are in jobs where maybe you just have a bad day and you're unhappy. And when do you make that transition from, I've just had a bad day, but I love my job and I love what I do, to I actually don't
like
love
this at all. And
yeah.
it's easy to lose sight of like what you're doing. Like even when I'm at my practicum and I'm at drug court and, you know, I see some people working and I'm like, is it just a bad day and this is stressful, or do you not like this, or you know, and then you get lost in a system and there's different components, and I think it's just really easy to lose sight of what you're doing, why you love something. I had that experience when I played volleyball too. Just, why am I doing this? Am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for my family? You know, and you have to regroup, reorganize.
Yeah, and so I thought a lot about why I wasn't happy, what about my job wasn't meshing, whether I just needed to do something a little bit different but stay in the law. And I finally just decided to quit my job and to take a time out. So I planned for 6 months and, you know, did all the things that you do when you know you're not going to have a job. I paid off my credit cards, I put money into savings, and talked to Chris about the fact that I wanted to do this. And it's not like I wanted to jump immediately into another career. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I just knew I needed to figure out what was happening, and I needed that perspective of being able to do nothing. So I decided to leave my job and left it, and then Chris and I traveled for 6 months.
Well, that's exciting.
Which was great. And because I had been stuck in an office and in the same place for, you know, 7 years, and I just wanted to have freedom. I wanted to be able to wake up every day and say I can do whatever, drive wherever, do whatever. So,
and to some degree we should have that, because that's what we're here on Earth for.
Yeah.
It seems like to you traveling is really important.
Yeah, it is. I think that gaining new experiences and new perspectives and seeing new things and meeting new people and just getting out there into the world is so important. And to have, you know, I know a lot of my friends who grew up in Maryland who are still there, and traveling isn't important to them. And sometimes I think, but there's so much that you're missing. And I didn't ever want to feel like I was missing anything, that I was making decisions without having full knowledge of all the opportunities that were out there.
Right.
And I just think traveling is fun, like trying new foods, trying new cultures.
Seeing different things.
Exactly right, yeah. So, and we wanted to do a very organic, sort of grassroots traveling. So we did 3 months road trip, first in the United States and then in Australia, where we lived out of a car and a tent, and we had a little grill, and we had all of our things packed into a bucket, and that's what we did.
So you basically drove a car. How did you pay for gas?
Well, from our savings, because
Okay.
we had saved up enough money because we knew we were going to be taking time off.
But everything else you kind of just,
Yep.
not bummed it, but
We
well,
did.
I guess kind of bummed it.
Yeah, we did bum it.
Okay.
And it was funny because I sort of went, it's like 1 week I was in an office wearing a suit, going to court, being so organized and so fancy, and you know, there's all these like engagements that you have to go to that are out the nicest, fanciest lounges with the nicest, fanciest champagne, and then the next week I'm like living out of a car with my plastic utensils, and you know.
What was that like?
At first it was really hard. I was like, what are we doing? And then by the second week, I was like, this is the most amazing thing that I have ever decided to do, because you realize not only how little you need to live, but how little you actually need to be happy. Like, it was amazing. And we got to drive to New Orleans, and I got to see New Orleans for the first time, and we got to, you know, go out and watch an actual jazz band play jazz and eat New Orleans, you know, all the little French pastries that they have, and we got to drive through the Grand Canyon and hike the Grand Canyon and horseback ride through Bryce Canyon and drive through the windy, you know, valleys of South Dakota and do all of these amazing things that made me happier than anything I've ever done.
That made you happier than money.
Yeah,
or happier
exactly
than
right.
having a career that you thought was what you wanted.
Exactly right.
With that, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. This is the Empower Hour. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino, and I'm here with Rachel. So glad you're here.
Yeah, me too.
We'll be back in a few seconds. Thanks.
Aloha, my name is Paul Jackson, better known as PJ, and my local interest is in sports. I have my own sports radio show at KWAI AM 1080 that you can stream live. I also have my own website, pjsportsradio.com. We have live guests in studio, and we talk about discussions and topics that everyone wants to know locally here on the islands. We cover everything from surfing to basketball to whatever's going on locally, sports-wise. We try to do our best and cover the topics in depth as much as we can. Once again, thank you for joining PJ here on Hawaii Sports Update. Mahalo.
Hi, my name is Andrew Howard. I'm an astronomer at the Institute for Astronomy at the University of Hawaii up in Manoa. I'd like to tell you about the annual open house that we're having. This year it is on April 6th. 11 to 4 p.m. It's an all ages event, kids, grown-ups, even people in between, everyone is welcome. We have a lot of really fun activities. You get to meet astronomers, look at yourself in an infrared camera, play with Legos, make robots, look at videos. You can even make some of the kids like to make comets out of gravel and snow. Even adults like to do that too. You'll be able to look at the sun with a solar camera safely. It's really a great activity. We do this every year in April, and I hope to see you this year. Thanks.
Welcome back to the Empower Hour. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino. I'm here with Rachel. She's the ASM at Lululemon. She's also a lawyer in her past life. We were just laughing about that because the first time she said that, she had just gotten the job at Lululemon, and we were sitting there, and she was introducing herself, and she goes, "In my past life," and your accent is like Australian, but it's not, but it has a little bit of it, but
yeah.
I don't know. And so she goes, "In my past life, I was a lawyer," and I was sitting there going, oh my gosh. I leaned over to my friend Rachel. I was like, is that like her reincarnation, like before this life, like she was a lawyer? We were so confused,
Yeah.
but now I understand completely.
Yeah, I guess the things, like if I list out everything that I've done, it feels almost sometimes like it happened to a different person. Obviously it's me, but
you've changed and
yeah,
evolved.
exactly right. And so it's funny because I do think of it as my past life. You know, not that I was reincarnated, but that it sort of was a different person. Yeah, yeah, that's me.
So after you guys traveled,
So we did our travels around the U.S. and then went and did them in Australia, which was amazing because I'd seen a little bit of Australia, but not a lot in the time that I was there. And Chris, you know, I guess it's that thing of when you live somewhere, you don't always travel there.
You don't. I live in Hawaii, and people tell me streets or beaches, and I'm like, I don't know where that is. And they're like, you grew up here, and I'm like, I know, but it doesn't mean you get to go and explore.
I know, it's so true. And you think because it's your home and you live there, you always have the time to do it.
And you don't make the time, yeah.
So it was great because Chris and I got to see a lot of his country for the first time. And it's a totally different wild country, especially when you get into the outback. And so, you know, sort of seeing the kangaroo and the wild horses and all of that was really crazy and cool and fun. And getting to see more of the indigenous people of Australia too, who live like in the center, was amazing. So that was great. And then we got back to Sydney, and Chris only left his job temporarily. He wasn't like me. I mean, he enjoys his work, and so he was like, I'm going to take a break to have this time with you, but he had always planned to go back, which he did. So he went back to work, and I was sitting on the couch like, what do I do now? And I didn't know, and I had absolutely no idea. And I had never felt like I had been that sort of very devoted wife, and so I wanted to do that for a little while. And I literally was cooking dinner every night, cleaning the house, doing the laundry, just, you know, back rubs when he got home from work, just being that really devoted wife. And that was really, really fun, and eventually unrewarding because I needed to do something
for you.
Yeah, for me.
But that's something else with Rachel. I remember the first time I met her, we were in the back room, and I was like, I don't want children, and everybody was like, oh, you don't want children, and they're like all over me about it. And I never say I don't want children anymore because everybody always gets on my case about it. And then Rachel's like, it's okay, I don't want children either. And I was like, what? Because normally you don't hear very many women that, you know, don't want a family, or I don't know I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I had one of those moms who always wanted to be a mom and was an
Mine
extremely
too.
devoted mother, and she was always there with like the graham crackers and cheese when
And
you
all
got
the
home.
snacks.
Yeah, and I had that as my mom, and I know that if I were to be a mother, that is the type of mother I would want to be.
And that's a fully devoted
Yeah,
mother. You can't
yeah.
have anything else.
And I know the sacrifices that you have to make to be a mom, and I bow down to the women who do it because
Oh, I
it
do
is
too.
insane. And I also know that just for me personally, it wouldn't make me happy because I would have to compromise
Me
too
too.
much. Yeah. And I love and I want to give myself and to give my love and all that I have to give, but I just feel like it's in a different way than having children. So yeah, so I totally relate to you on that level.
I love that. Finally one person.
Yeah. But there I was, being a devoted wife, and was like, what do I do now? And I actually came up with this crazy idea where I was going to write down a list of all the things I love, and then write down companies that were associated with those things. Because what I knew when I finished my travels was that I needed to do something that I loved, and that was a part of who I was, not something I had to change who I was to suit it.
Right. Because that's what you were doing as a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly
you
right.
You loved it, but you had to fit the part.
Exactly
and you
right.
wanted to love it.
Yeah, and I wanted, and I started thinking about it, and I would say, I don't want to have family and friends and work and life and fitness. I just want to have a lifestyle
Of everything
that it's cohesive and it all makes sense together, and I'm not constantly feeling like I'm working with moving parts, but that it's all just part of the same thing. So I was like, well, I have to start by knowing that I'm doing something that I love. And so I made that list, and on that list was yoga. I had years before done my yoga teacher training and only taught part-time while I was a lawyer, and it was too hard, so I ultimately had given it up and had gotten away from the yoga when I was in my really stressful time of being a lawyer.
What is it about yoga that helps you?
I think it was the grounding for me. The first time I had taken a class was in New York when I was working on this really big case and feeling super stressed out, and somebody was like, you need yoga, and probably had the reaction that a lot of people have when, you know, someone says that to them the first time of that's what hippies do,
right.
Or that's what, you know, people who just sit and go, you know, do. Like, but I decided to take a class because I was like, yeah, why not? I'm in New York experiencing all these new things. I'm going to try yoga, and it was amazing. I had this really hard physical practice, but also this really hard mental practice of like quieting my mind and getting all of the noise out. And when it was over, it was like everything that I thought was this massive big deal before I went into class, all of a sudden I had super perspective around the fact that it wasn't a big deal at all. And it became therapy for me. It was a really good way for me to unwind and unplug and get perspective around life. And doing the teacher training was awesome because it allowed me to understand more about the philosophy behind yoga and just the science and the proper, you know, like with weightlifting, the proper alignment and all of that sort of stuff. And it allowed me to have a better yoga practice and a more insightful yoga practice, which I loved. And then I wanted to give that to other people, which is why I started teaching, but ultimately found that teaching wasn't for me. So moved away from it. But then got back into practicing and really loved practicing and loved yoga and loved how it made me feel. And I thought, okay, if I don't want to teach yoga, what can I be involved in that has to do with yoga? And I was like, Lululemon.
How did you get the idea to like write everything down?
It just came to me. I wish I had some sort of insightful, like, you know, I spoke to a Swami, or it came to me in a dream, but it was just, I kept saying, I want to do something I love. I want to do something I love. I want to do something I love. And I was like, well, what do I love? And then I was like, well, how can I do something I love? Well, what companies do something that I love? And it was just something, I guess, that I worked out on my own, and it wasn't any big, great, insightful thing. It just sort of happened.
But still, it's such a good idea.
And I always say that to people anytime I'm having a conversation with them, and they're like, I'm trying to figure out what's next for me. I'm like, write a list of what you love, write how you can do that, like what, you know.
Yeah, because then you can see it clearly, and it's not just like a bundled mess in your head.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah. And so Lululemon was one of the things on the list. I applied for a lot of different things in that time, and the the only callback I got was from Lululemon. They asked me to come in and meet them, and this was when I was in Australia, and I went in and met the manager there, and she loved my story, and so I then went on the process, which is, you know, as you know, it's a number of interviews and different types of ways of meeting and connecting with people, and ultimately got the job. And after the 2 days of training that I did, I knew it was the company that I was going to spend the rest of my life at.
Yeah.
It was literally like the light that shines down, and you're like, oh my gosh.
Because you found what fit for you.
Yeah, I found what fit for me. And it had everything. It had the fact that I love interacting with people. It had that I like being part of a company and part of a business that runs and operates. And
it has that organization factor,
Yeah.
though, still behind the scene.
Yeah, definitely.
Like keeping the books or, you know, the budget and this and that,
Yeah.
which you're really good at.
And the problem solving and the intellectual challenge that I wanted and needed, and also the attachment to yoga and the attachment to the community, like to get out in the local community and
How important do you think community is? Because I know for
So
ThinkTech
important.
community, it's, you know, one of the main focuses of the show.
I think it's so important. I know that there's this old saying, and I'm probably going to misquote it, so forgive me, but it says something like to have a child takes a person, to raise a child takes a community. And I think when it comes to actually being a whole person and feeling like you're attached not just to your life but to your family and to what's happening around you, community is so important. So important. And that's one of the things that drew me to Hawaii, was the communal sense that exists here on the island and the attachment that the people have to each other, to their families, to their friends.
And I wish to some degree we would get it back to where it was before. I know when I was growing up, we were outside playing all the time, and all of our neighbors, we all cooked together. And I don't know if it's just like I grew up and times have changed a little bit and people don't have as much time, but I think that's such an important aspect, to be close to the people that are around you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I, for whatever reason, I was never that person who wanted to have one best friend. I would rather have a community of people that I sort of have not a super close attachment to, like you're my best friend and I call you up every day, but just a community of people that I know I can rely on and that support me and I support them, and that was something that I always was drawn to. You know, I danced growing up and was on a team, and I played sport growing up and I was on a team, and you know, my family, we always used to talk about each other like we were a team, and so that sort of idea of team and community was really important to me, and I love that you get that at Lululemon. It's so great. It's really, really good. Yeah.
So if you were going to recommend to somebody that's in a job that they're not happy in, and this is what they've worked their life for, because you were there, this is what you worked your life for, this is what you thought you wanted, what do you do? You kind of explained it, but like if you were going to give bullet points, boom, boom, boom.
I think the first thing is actually being honest with yourself about what's making you unhappy, because like I said, for me, I could have made the decision that no, I actually really love being a lawyer, it's just this particular job or this particular team. So I think the first stage is being seriously honest with yourself about what's making you unhappy. And then you have to just be brave enough to change it and to not fear it. I think that so many people stay in jobs because they say, I have a mortgage, I have a family, I need to have money, and this is what I do. Luckily, I didn't have a mortgage or children that I had to worry about. Otherwise, it could have, you know, worked out differently for me. And I had a very supportive husband who was supportive of the journey that I was on and what I wanted to do. But I would say definitely like being honest with yourself about what needs to change, and then not being afraid to make those changes. And then starting back at basics, taking some serious time out, not moving directly into something new and feeling like you have to make that decision of moving right into something new.
It's such a rush.
Yeah, and you're coming from this perspective of being unhappy. How are you supposed to make positive decisions when you're in an unpositive place?
You can't.
So I think taking that time away to travel and to be in a really positive place allowed me to then move forward making positive, good decisions. And yeah, create the list. This is what I love, and this is what people who do what I love, and attach yourself to those people. Yeah.
Well, you heard it from the source, Rachel. She definitely, you went through like a long journey. I didn't even know half of this.
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, it was great. And now I'm the assistant store manager at a store in a state, in a community that I love, working for a company that I love with amazing people like you.
Like me.
Who inspire every day. And now can actually say that I'm happy.
Yay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Of course.
This
Thank
is
you
the
for having
Empower
me.
Hour. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino, and I was here with Rachel. Oh, I'm so happy you're here. Have a good weekend, guys. See you next time.